Hollywood's golden age, roughly spanning the 1930s through the 1950s, was a time of unmatched glamour, timeless beauty, and cinematic magic. The silver screen flickered with the faces of women who seemed almost too perfect to be real. They wore diamonds under studio lights, signed autographs with gloved hands, and smiled for cameras with a practiced grace that made the whole world fall in love with them. But step behind the velvet curtain, and a very different story begins to unfold. Because for every dazzling performance captured on film, there was a dressing room argument, a co-star reduced to tears, a director storming off set, or a crew member too afraid to speak up. Fame, in Hollywood's golden years, was a pressure cooker, and not everyone handled it with grace. Some of these legendary actresses, worshipped by millions, were secretly feared by the very people who worked alongside them every single day. Today, we are pulling back that curtain completely. We're counting down the 20 most cruel, difficult, and controversial actresses from Hollywood's golden age. Women whose brilliance on screen was sometimes matched only by their ferocity off it. Some of these names will shock you. Others won't surprise you at all. But every single story is worth telling, because the truth behind Hollywood's golden glow is far more interesting than the fantasy it sold to the world. Let's get into it. We begin our list with Clara Bow, the original it girl of Hollywood. In the late 1920s, nobody burned brighter than Clara. She was electric, spontaneous, and utterly magnetic on screen. The kind of actress audiences couldn't take their eyes off. Her 1927 film Wings made her an overnight sensation, and for a brief, dazzling moment, she was the most famous woman in America. But Clara came with a temper that matched her energy. She was raised in Brooklyn, and she never lost the rough edges that came with that upbringing. On set, she clashed frequently with directors who tried to mold her into something more polished and proper. She didn't take direction quietly. She pushed back, argued, and on more than one occasion walked off set entirely after heated confrontations. Her Brooklyn accent and blunt way of speaking made studio executives deeply uncomfortable. They wanted a curated, controlled star. Clara Bow refused to be either. Off-screen, her life was a tabloid feast. Public affairs, late-night scandals, and a reputation for ignoring Hollywood's unwritten social rules entirely. By the early 1930s, the studio system had essentially chewed her up and spat her out. She retired young, and Hollywood moved on. But behind the legacy of charm and rebellion lies a woman who made more than a few people miserable along the way. Tallulah Bankhead was, in the simplest possible terms, completely ungovernable. She was a Southern belle turned theatrical wildfire. A woman who walked into every room like she already owned it and expected everyone else to simply be grateful she'd shown up. Her wit was razor-sharp, her personality enormous, and her capacity for shocking behavior almost unlimited. She was known across Hollywood and Broadway for her unfiltered remarks. She once told a young actress to her face that her only remarkable quality was her legs. She performed outrageous stunts at parties, made jokes that crossed every conceivable line, and seemed to genuinely delight in making people uncomfortable. Studio heads found her exhausting. Directors found her unpredictable. And the crew members who had to manage her day-to-day demands found her, by most accounts, absolutely insufferable. What made Bankhead particularly cruel was not just her behavior, but her intentionality. She wasn't unaware of the effect she had on people. She simply didn't care. She had been bullying people since childhood. She was famously expelled from convent schools more than once for her disruptive behavior. By the time Hollywood got her, that edge had only sharpened. She is remembered today as an icon. But the people who worked with her remember something quite different. Mae West was one of the most daring and provocative figures in all of Hollywood history. She wrote her own scripts, controlled her own image, and refused to let any director, producer, or studio executive tell her what she could or could not do. That independence made her a legend. It also made her one of the most difficult people in the industry to be around. On set, West had no patience for anyone she deemed beneath her creative standards. She challenged directors openly and loudly, often in front of the entire cast and crew. She had been kicked out of Hollywood parties for being too provocative, and she wore that distinction like a badge of honor. Her boldness was genuine, but it frequently crossed the line from confidence into cruelty, particularly toward younger actresses whom she perceived as competition. What separated Mae West from other difficult stars was the precision of her unkindness. She didn't lose her temper in blind rages. She was calculated, sharp, and deliberate. When she wanted to cut someone down, She did it with a smile and a one-liner that left the room laughing and the target bleeding. That kind of cruelty, the kind that comes wrapped in wit, is often the hardest to recover from. Ginger Rogers is remembered almost exclusively for her grace, beauty, and legendary dance partnership with Fred Astaire. The image of the two of them gliding across a ballroom floor is one of the most enduring in all of cinema. But behind that image was a woman who had serious steel in her spine, and who was not above using it against the people around her. Rogers fought hard for equal pay and equal recognition in an era when women in Hollywood were largely expected to be decorative and compliant. That fighting spirit was admirable, but it also made her genuinely difficult to work with, particularly when she felt she wasn't getting the respect she deserved. She pushed back against directors aggressively, clashed with studio executives repeatedly, and developed a reputation for being cold and demanding on set. Some of her co-workers described her as dismissive and unkind toward those she considered beneath her station. She was famously competitive, and that competitiveness sometimes manifested as outright hostility. There is a difference between standing up for yourself and cutting others down to elevate yourself. And Ginger Rogers, by many accounts, sometimes crossed that line. Rita Hayworth was once called the most beautiful woman in the world, and nobody who saw her on screen would have argued. She was luminous, talented, and compelling in a way that transcended ordinary stardom. But the pressure of being Rita Hayworth, of maintaining that impossible image while battling serious personal and mental health struggles, made her increasingly difficult to work with as the years went on. Directors frequently complained about her lack of punctuality and her difficulty maintaining focus during filming. Productions were delayed, costs increased, and frustrations mounted. She experienced emotional outbursts on set that left cast and crew shaken, and her personal behavior became increasingly erratic. The tragedy of Rita Hayworth's story is that her struggles were rooted in genuine suffering, mental health issues that went undiagnosed and untreated for much of her life. But suffering, however real and legitimate, does not erase the impact a person's behavior has on others. Many who worked with her bore the cost of her difficulties without any acknowledgement or recognition. Loretta Young presented the most pristine, polished, and morally upright image in all of Hollywood. She was known for her devout Catholic faith, her impeccable manners, and her reputation as one of the industry's great ladies. She even ran a so-called swear jar on her sets, finding crew members who used profanity in her presence. It all sounds rather charming, until you hear from the people who actually worked with her. Behind the grace and the glamour was a woman whose perfectionism had curdled into something far less pleasant. Young was demanding to a degree that bordered on tyrannical. She was deeply involved in every aspect of her productions: wardrobe, lighting, script revisions, scene setups, and she did not respond well when things deviated from her vision. She clashed repeatedly with directors and fellow actors, and her dissatisfaction with other people's work was rarely expressed diplomatically. The gap between Loretta Young's public image and the private reality of working with her was, by many accounts, vast and jarring. Dorothy Dandridge's story is one of the most genuinely heartbreaking in Hollywood history. She made history as the first African-American woman nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, and she did so in an industry that was openly, systematically hostile to her very presence. The cruelty she experienced at the hands of Hollywood was immeasurable. The racism, the limited opportunities, the constant undermining of her talent and dignity. But Dandridge's response to that environment, shaped by trauma and survival instinct, sometimes manifested in ways that were difficult for the people around her. She became guarded, cold, and deeply selective in her interactions. She was perceived by many colleagues as aloof and unfriendly, though context matters enormously here. A Black woman navigating a viciously racist industry had very different reasons for building walls than her white contemporaries did. Her personal life, 2 failed marriages, financial collapse, mental health struggles, compounded everything. She became more withdrawn and difficult as time went on. Her story is less one of cruelty and more one of a woman shaped and broken by circumstances almost entirely beyond her control. Vivien Leigh was one of the greatest actresses who ever lived. Her performance as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind remains one of cinema's most iconic achievements, and her work in A Streetcar Named Desire confirmed her as an artist of extraordinary depth. But Vivien Leigh also suffered from severe, undiagnosed bipolar disorder at a time when mental illness was almost entirely misunderstood. Her episodes on set were frightening and unpredictable. Colleagues described sudden and dramatic mood shifts, emotional outbursts, long periods of erratic behavior, and a cruelty that seemed to emerge from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. She was known to lash out at co-stars and crew members during her episodes in ways that were genuinely hurtful and destabilizing to entire productions. Her marriage to Laurence Olivier, one of the great love stories of the era, was repeatedly fractured by the toll her condition took on both of them. Vivien Leigh was not a cruel woman by nature, but the disease she carried made her capable of cruelty, and those who bore the brunt of her episodes rarely forgot it. Gloria Swanson was Hollywood royalty long before the term had been invented. In the 1920s, she earned the equivalent of millions in today's money, lived in palaces, wore extraordinary gowns, and demanded, and received, a level of deference that most monarchs would have envied. She was not, in any conventional sense, an easy person. Swanson's reputation for controlling behavior on set was legendary. She demanded authority over every element of her films and treated those who failed to meet her standards with open contempt. When sound arrived and her career began its decline, her difficulty intensified. Her famous declaration that silent film actresses had faces that talking pictures couldn't match was emblematic of a woman who responded to change with bitterness and superiority rather than adaptation. Those who worked with her during her decline described a woman who could be withering, dismissive, and coldly unkind to anyone she perceived as responsible for the Hollywood that had moved on without her. Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell, crackled with screen energy that has never quite been replicated. She was funny, sensual, and magnetic in a way that felt genuinely dangerous. She was also known to have a temper that could fill an entire soundstage. Stories of Harlow throwing objects at crew members during arguments were calm.